Legend says genius thrives in chaos, but on a Philippine river, chaos tried to drown it. Typhoon winds, a failing heart, and a star who wouldn't play by the page. You won't see Apocalypse Now the same way again. Stay tuned. In 1976, Manila air sat heavy as wet canvas, while Coppola wore two hats and three mortgages: director, writer, producer, plus human collateral. United Artists wanted scale, not chaos. Zoetrope promised vision, not vapor. Paper said $12 million would do. Paper also burns. The jungle had opinions. The relationship looked simple. UA fronts distribution and prestige. He brings thunder. Milius's script promised mythic fire. Sheen and Brando promised gravity. Helicopters promised spectacle. On paper, it worked. In person, it didn't. A typhoon ripped the calendar. The budget tore right after it. What changed was cash flow. Sets drowned, schedules slid, and the payroll clock refused mercy. He borrowed against tomorrow, then against his house, then against faith itself. Dailies piled up like driftwood, each reel a bill, each bill a threat. Banks called it dawn. Lawyers stayed for dusk. From there, the silence did the talking. Completion bond talk spooked everyone. Executives wanted control. Editors wanted time. Crew wanted sleep. He wanted a movie, not a foreclosure. The cut refused to lock. The soundscape grew biblical. Rumors bred in screening rooms. The vineyard heard the jungle breathing. Vivid detail. The shoot stretched to roughly 238 days and chewed through about 1.5 million feet of film. Helicopters waited on generals. Lightning waited on no one. And the river kept rising. The ledger rose faster. Each storm day accrued interest the sky did not intend to pay back, and the bill came due. So he rolled the dice at Cannes. Work in progress, stamped like a bandage on a bullet wound. The gamble hit. Palme d'Or, shared but loud enough to buy leverage, time, and oxygen. Debt didn't vanish. It blinked. He exhaled, briefly, because the jungle wasn't finished. Consequence. United Artists got a phenomenon, Zoetrope kept breathing, and Coppola walked the wire without a net. The next problem wasn't money. It had a pulse. Heartbeats don't respect schedules. Which brings us to the moment a lead actor's chest tightened and the entire film stopped to listen. It was early 1977, deep in the Philippine shoot, when the set's adrenaline turned into a whisper no one wanted to hear. Martin Sheen, lean, focused, carrying Willard's weight, hit a wall that wasn't on any call sheet. Remote locations complicate everything. Roads thin out, hospitals get farther away, and time grows teeth. Crew radios crackled like locusts. The production held its breath, then held it longer. Even the river seemed to wait. The working relationship was already stretched, star to director, director to studio, studio to insurers. Sheen gave the film its spine. Coppola asked for the marrow. Each morning the pages changed, and with them the load he had to carry on screen. He trained, he smoked, he kept going. But then the body spoke in a language louder than ambition. Schedulers can move a scene. They cannot negotiate with a pulse. What went wrong arrived like lightning. Sudden pain, a collapse, the sick geometry of panic on a jungle set. The crew pivoted from cinema to triage, from blocking to oxygen, from dailies to vital signs. Calls went out, cars rolled, doctors worked. In a business of illusions, this was the opposite. No myth, no metaphor. Just a man, a heart, and a clock that wouldn't slow down. Escalation followed as it always does. The shutdown, the budget bleeding in silence, executives hovering at a distance, and a director pacing holes into the earth. Shoot days evaporated. Helicopter noise, so cinematic on screen, felt brutal in the real world. Morale dipped, then steadied, then dipped again. The jungle kept its humidity and its indifference. Somewhere, Invoices matured into problems with names. Heat stroke. That became the official line, the neat phrase repeated to keep press and panic at bay. It wasn't cynical. It was survival. Public calm buys private time, and time buys a chance to finish. Still, the rumor mill did what rumor mills do. A film about madness now had its own off-camera fever dream, and the calendar kept scowling. Consequence first. The production paused, recalibrated, and built a new lane around recovery. Sheen would return and deliver work that still vibrates, but the shoot's fragility was now undeniable. Insurance talk rose, so did the stakes. Coppola doubled down on the edit plan, tripled down on sound, and promised himself the river wouldn't write the ending. Which brings us to the day. A legend arrived with baggage no script could carry. He arrived like a thundercloud at dusk, famous and formidable, carrying the gravity of myth and the weight of real life. The plan said Colonel Kurtz would tower in daylight. Reality said otherwise. Scripts stack neatly, egos don't. A jungle hut became a confessional. A director became a negotiator. The star became the weather. The relationship twisted on contact. Brando wanted ideas, not pages. Riddles, not cues. The production wanted a shape. UA wanted a schedule. What changed was the clock. Shots slipped into night so faces could slip into shadow. The character retreated from muscle to voice, from posture to philosophy. The camera obeyed the dark. Escalation arrived as riffs, not lines. Rehearsals ballooned into seminars. Paragraphs dissolved on the floor. Lighting plans bent toward blackness. Wardrobe choices vanished under a frame that hugged a shaved crown and eyes like lighthouses. Every hour cost money. Every improvisation minted more footage. Somewhere, the editing room started sweating. Here's the part people forget. You can hide a body in shadow, but you can't hide time. Film stock rolls whatever you give it. By month's end, they had reels stacked like firewood, brilliant, unruly, and hungry for an editor brave enough to carve meaning from fog and thunder. Vivid detail. Sequences were staged in near-total darkness, so Kurtz became mostly a silhouette and a voice. The jungle fell away. The dialogue turned into weather. Microphones drank everything. The river didn't care. It just kept moving. The outage-proof solution, shadows, became the movie's signature and the accountant's migraine. From there, the silence did the talking. Sound design swelled into a character of its own. Structure shifted to meet it. The myth hardened. The schedule didn't. The film had a heart attack's memory and a star's momentum. And the bill came due. Too much film, not enough time. And a premiere window closing like a fist. Consequence. Coppola leaned into the legend he'd captured. Voice, shadow, dread. And gambled that audiences would lean in too. Editing became triage. Mixers became poets. The answer wouldn't come on the river. It would come under spotlights, which brings us to Can, a work-in-progress label and a bet that risk could buy redemption. Can, May 1979. A seaside circus of tuxedos and deadlines. He brings a film that isn't finished and a reputation that is. The print lands like contraband. Programmers argue, journalists sharpen pencils, buyers sniff for weakness and myth. He walks in knowing the cut isn't locked. He walks in anyway. The relationship pivots. Festival to filmmaker. Filmmaker to studio. Studio to future creditors. He needs oxygen, buzz, headlines, leverage. They need certainty. Angles, something to sell. On paper, it's a mistake. In person, it's a strategy. Premiering a half-tamed animal can look like surrender, or it can look like nerve. What changed was the room. On darkness fell. Rotors throbbed, and the theater became a jungle with velvet seats. Sequences that fought him in the edit found rhythm with an audience to breathe for them. Lapses turned to tension. Ambiguities read as design. The cut was raw. The reaction wasn't. From there, the silence did the talking. Whispers ran out the doors and down the croisette. Phones lit up. Executives recalculated. The studio line shifted from anxiety to opportunity. A problem picture looked like an event. A man on a financial cliff suddenly had a railing. Hype moved numbers even before tickets existed. Work in progress. 2 words on the print, not a plea, but a posture. It said, "Judge the power, not the polish." The phrase did its job. Reviewers wrote with verbs, not caveats. The narrative became risk and artistry, not delay and debt. The badge turned into armor, and the bill came due in gold. Palme d'Or. Shared, but seismic. The laurel didn't fix the cut, but it bought time, leverage, and air cover for post. Distributors leaned in. The studio loosened its grip. He left the Riviera with a trophy and a mandate. Finish big, mix bigger, and make the theater shake. Consequence. The film left Cannes as a phenomenon in waiting, not a cautionary tale. The calendar turned from enemy to accomplice. Next came the crucible of sound and structure. Months of carving thunder and whispers into sense. Which brings us to the editing rooms, where reels became a war drum, and the final cut found its spine. The edit bays sounded like engines at idle. Reels stacked shoulder high. Coffee went cold next to grease pencils and marked up trims. He chased a structure that didn't fight the footage, a heartbeat that could carry helicopters, whispers, and guilt in the same breath. The jungle moved into the room and refused to leave. You don't tame a river. You build a channel around it. Here's the part people forget. The movie that looked chaotic on set demanded ruthless geometry in post. Scenes became pulses. Pulses became movements. Rhythm took over where plot had frayed. He and his editors carved paths through dense brush, image, then echo, then memory, until the film breathed on its own. Sound wasn't decoration. It was the spine. When the visuals faltered, the audio marched. What changed was scale. Mixed stages swelled with layers, rotors, radios, insects, prayer, and speakers big enough to rattle ribs. Notes multiplied. Deadlines pretended to be flexible, and then weren't. Every pass clarified one thing and blurred another. He gambled on immersion over explanation. If you felt lost, you felt like Willard. Disorientation became design, not defect. The escalation was technical and human. Engineers stretched nights into mornings. Editors pulled meanings from accidents, and temp tracks turned into weapons. The picture wanted discipline. The sound wanted weather. He learned to let both lead. Critics would call it operatic later. For now, it was a long corridor of decisions that all cost money, time, or sleep. Usually all three. The horror. A whisper placed like a blade. Not an ending so much as a diagnosis. It slid under the mix and bled outward. A soft verdict after 2 hours of thunder. You heard it, and the rest of the soundtrack rearranged itself around those words. The jungle finally spoke English, and the bill came due. Print deadlines, ad buys, and studio nerves lined up like checkpoints. But the machine he'd built, the mix, the structure, the dread, finally locked. Cannes bought leverage. Post bought clarity. The movie stepped out of the dark and into release calendars that smelled like jet fuel and popcorn. Consequence. He had a cut that could hold a crowd and a soundscape that could shake them. Next up, opening night math, headlines, and a box office that would decide who'd been right, the bankers or the believers. Which brings us to theaters, summer heat, and a war film that sold tickets like a rock tour. August 1979. America meets the jungle on the big screen. The poster screams, "Apocalypse Now," but the mood in lobbies feels like confession. Lines curl around blocks. Critics chase metaphors. and nobody's sure if they've seen a masterpiece or a breakdown wearing medals. The studio calls it a hit. He calls it survival. The relationship resets audience to artist, artist to myth. United Artists counts dollars. He counts breaths. The same images that nearly bankrupted him now print money. Estimates break the $150 million mark worldwide, and that roar covers the static of what it cost to get here. Reporters ask what it all meant. He says little. The film does the talking. What changed was control. For the first time in years, he wasn't just paying bills. He was rewriting what an epic could sound like. Helicopters turned into hymns. Madness looked like art. The same footage that almost buried him became a monument. Even the studio, once wary, now spoke in superlatives. Success makes saints out of gamblers. From there, the silence did the talking. Oscars followed. Best sound, best cinematography. Cannes already stamped its approval. The legend calcified. What had been chaos now read as intention, a war about war itself. The phrase work in progress aged into mythology. The press framed him as both general and survivor. The jungle became legend. So did the man who tried to film it. Vivid detail. On stage, at the 1980 Academy Awards, he looked more relieved than victorious. Eyeglasses catching light, applause rolling like aftershock. The win didn't erase debt, but it closed the book on fear. American zoetrope could breathe again. So could he. And the bill, at last, was paid. Not just in box office, but in myth. The man who once said he wanted to capture the horror of war had lived it twice. Once in fiction, once in finance. Consequence, the story didn't end. It evolved. Years later, Redux and Final Cut proved the river still had new currents. Which brings us to legacy, what it all meant once the noise faded and the work remained. The afterglow didn't last. Success buys rope, it can also make a noose. He pivoted to a dreamscape musical, built romance out of neon, and tried to turn zoetrope into a studio that could mint its own weather. Critics blinked. Audiences stayed home. Creditors didn't blink at all. The hangover from glory tasted like interest. The working relationship changed shape again. Auteur to bank. Bank to backlot. Backlot to ledger. He chased independence with the fervor he once reserved for shots and sound. A self-made studio meant control. Lights that would wait, storms that would obey. A city that could bloom from plywood. On paper, a utopia. In practice, a tab. What changed was the scale of the bet. The Vegas street rose indoors, streetlights trapped in perpetual twilight, a love story sealed inside architecture. Costs echoed, marketing mumbled. The public, dazzled by war opera, shrugged at a Valentine. Opening weekend numbers arrived like a quiet apology. Bills answered louder. People confuse box office with destiny. Banks do not. Escalation spread beyond one picture. When a house carries that much weight, one miss shakes the foundation. Partners got nervous. Insurers got meticulous. Friends offered advice in hushed tones. He faced a familiar enemy with a different face. Not jungle mud, but red ink. The myth of indestructibility met math. Even legends sit across from spreadsheets. Vivid detail. A full city block was constructed on zoetrope stages, neon bending like calligraphy, rain machines standing by, camera cranes gliding through artificial night as if time itself were on payroll. From there, the silence did the talking. He stepped back, recalibrated, and let the evidence speak for him. A documentary, home movies turned confession, unspooled the chaos of the war film years later. The tapes carried arguments, fear, laughter, and a marriage of risk and craft. The public saw the price paid, not just the prize won. Myth turned mortal, then meaningful. And the bill came due in another currency, perspective. The near collapse taught him scope, and the tapes taught viewers the difference between bravado and endurance. Consequence. He would revisit the river with fresh tools, redux, then a final cut, proving the film still breathed. Which brings us to legacy maintenance, the art of rewriting without lying to the past. By the time the century turned, The Jungle had moved to film school, syllabi, and streaming queues. Apocalypse. Now wasn't just a movie anymore, it was an ecosystem. Students quoted it. Veterans of the shoot still dreamed it. He looked back not to repent, but to refine. If myth calcifies, the artist's job is to sand it until it breathes again. The relationship shifted one more time. Legend to curator, curator to craftsman. Redux in 2001, stitched in 49 lost minutes. A plantation dinner, ghost stories by lamplight, detours into excess and fatigue. Critics argued about necessity. He cared about tone. The new version wasn't about more. It was about hearing the same nightmare through a wider lens. The river spoke in full sentences now. What changed was technology. Digital restoration let him sculpt with precision the jungle once denied. Colors deepened. Sound grew muscular again. Helicopters circled in cleaner arcs. It was the same war, reborn in 5.1 clarity. For a man once buried by overages, the ability to fix everything without bankrupting anyone must have felt biblical. But then, every perfectionist meets the ghost of completion. 2019's final cut arrived, leaner and darker. The plantation went quiet again. Pacing tightened. Madness glimmered like steel under moonlight. He called it his favorite child. At last, finished. Audiences felt like they were seeing an old wound under new light. The Jungle had aged well. Vivid detail. At the 40th anniversary screening, he introduced the film with the same calm he once fought to find. Gray hair, clear eyes, and a smile that looked suspiciously like peace. From there, the silence did the talking. Festivals turned to tributes. The industry that once called him reckless now called him essential. A 2025 AFI Life Achievement Award sealed the arc. The man who filmed Chaos became its historian. Consequence: legacy intact, finances mended, myth balanced by candor. Apocalypse. Now was no longer a cautionary tale. It was a curriculum. Which brings us to reflection. What endurance looks like when the storm finally runs out of thunder. Rivalry with the clock. Deals versus vision. Nature versus narrative. Coppola survived all three and turned a disaster diary into canon. Chaos gave him scars. Craft made them symphonic. That's the thread. Ambition meets weather, breaks, then learns to breathe. What did you see in Apocalypse Now? The war on screen, or the cost behind it? Drop your take below. Tell us which saga to dig into next, and stick around for the next deep dive.